name is Steph Soltis. I was a pilot in the United States Air Force. I'm still actually a pilot for the reserves. Then went to the Air Force Academy. I went to training to learn to specifically fly the C-17, which is the large cargo jet aircraft that I have flown as a specialty for the last 16 years, I guess. I graduated from there in 2001, right before 9/11. I had finished the initial part of pilot training when 9/11 occurred, and then the greater proportion of my time in the service has been, well, our country has been at war.
The United States' official war on terror began following the attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11th. Members of the terrorist group Al-Qaeda hijacked 4 planes in an act of terrorism against the United States. 3 planes were successful in their mission and crashed into the north and south towers of the World Trade Center, as well as the Pentagon. The passengers on the 4th plane were able to overcome the hijackers and crash the plane into a field of rural Pennsylvania, avoiding the terrorists' initial target of Washington, D.C. These attacks resulted in the deaths of nearly 3,000 people and billions in infrastructural damage. Following those events, President George Bush announced in a speech that Afghanistan, a country that had notoriously harbored terrorists and was a stronghold for organizations such as Al-Qaeda, must turn over those involved in the attack. After the Taliban denied any involvement, the United States began airstrikes in Afghanistan in an effort to undermine the Taliban regime. These airstrikes were led by a coalition of countries committed to fighting terrorism on a global level and included many of the countries in NATO. Taliban rule in Afghanistan ended in late 2001, and the United States worked with Afghanistan to create a more stable and less oppressive government. As Al-Qaeda leader Osama bin Laden fled to Pakistan, the United States set their eyes on other potential threats in the region. The belief had risen that Iraq was harboring weapons of mass destruction as well as terrorists of Al-Qaeda under Saddam Hussein's dictatorial regime. So, the United States led a coalition that eventually resulted in the fall of the Iraqi government. The invasion of Iraq began in early 2003, but the United States maintained an official presence in the region until 2011. The war in Afghanistan and Iraq was and still is an extremely delicate situation, and many casualties have occurred on both sides.
Soldiers of the United States have had a lot of hardships, not only fighting the actual war in aggressive and desolate conditions, but finding reliable translators that help to conquer the language barrier between the Iraqi citizens and the United States military members. Many military members have gone on multiple tours and returned again and again to the same region in order to promote peace. Although this takes a toll on both the United States military budget as well as the soldiers themselves, the United States presence in the region was thought to have resulted in the formation of a less oppressive government for the time. In May of 2011, almost a decade after the events of September 11th, President Obama announced that Osama bin Laden, leader of Al-Qaeda and coordinator of the attacks, was killed in Pakistan by SEAL Team 6. The military was involved in many campaigns to find and extract information. However, military members were also involved in a large amount of humanitarian aid. The war caused destruction in the region, but the United States military tried to compensate for that by rebuilding hospitals and homes as well as relocating families once areas became safe again. The series of wars in the Middle East can be a controversial topic, but it is undeniable that many risked their lives in the pursuit of global freedom and retribution for the victims of the appalling attacks of September 11th.
"9/11 changed everything, obviously. When I was a cadet at the academy and when I was a brand new lieutenant, it was post-Cold War, pre-9/11. So it was kind of like, the world is changing. We don't know how, but the world is changing. The Soviet Union's gone. Our big obvious enemy is gone. And there were very few people, even within the military, who had, we knew terrorism was a thing, but we didn't know it was going to be this globally life-altering thing. So 9/11 occurred, and it was clear to us that we were going to be going somewhere and doing something. It was clear to us that, I think as soon as the second plane hit, okay, well there's going to be a war. I don't think any of us realized it would still be going on 16 years later. And it's a very nebulous, difficult enemy to fight because it's not the traditional nation-state format. So who are you fighting? You know, and it's hard to tell when you're over there. There are Afghans and Iraqis that put their lives on the line for us, and that, you know, they have death sentences on them and their families because they helped us. And then there are Afghans and Iraqis that worked with us and then turned their guns on us, and 3 of my friends were killed that way. So it's hard to know who to trust. And it's hard to know, like, I mean, we can beat anybody. Like the United States military, we can beat anybody, but if we can't figure out where they are, where they're so embedded in the local population, like obviously we're not going to go and do things that are going to get a lot of innocent civilians killed. So I don't know that we know the answer.
Over many centuries, countries all over the world have attempted to occupy the radical state of Afghanistan. Afghanistan, which is largely reliant on agriculture and the export of poppy flowers used to make opiate drugs, was being forced under the control of the Russians during the 1980s. In order to counteract Russian expansion and prevent further Russian imperialism, the United States aided the Mujahideen leadership in place at the time. Through the support of the United States, the Mujahideen were able to push out the Russian troops, which led to a vacuum of power in the region. After the withdrawal of the Russians, there was a void of power, which led to the rise of a radical and militaristic Islamic group referred to as the Taliban. The Taliban, an extreme sect of Islam, rose to power in the mid-90s and took control of the region and imposed its extreme adherence to Sharia law, as well as its brutal treatment of local populations. The Taliban strictly segregated women and largely limited their access to education and economic opportunity, which led to Afghanistan having one of the lowest literacy rates for women in the world. In Afghanistan, under the reign of the Taliban, radical terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda were allowed to train and operate within the country. This freedom encouraged the organization of one of the biggest terror attacks on the United States, led by Osama bin Laden. On September 11, 2001, the terrorist attacks on the United States led to the war on terrorism and the military intervention in Afghanistan. The United States military entered Afghanistan in an effort to remove the Taliban from power and attack Al-Qaeda. The state of Afghanistan today is that they are in the process of building a democratic system of government and forming a military capable of defending the country.
So when I was a kid, the Cold War was on, so the Soviet Union was still a thing, and there was a very clear distinction between, you know, we were a free country, and then there were unfree, tyrannical countries, you know, behind the Iron Curtain. And my parents were really big on little mini civics lessons, and so one of their lessons was, you know, everyone needs to give back, everyone needs to contribute. And I think as a small child, just took that very literally and thought, okay, well, the best way to contribute to defending our values and freedoms is to literally defend our values and freedoms. Sure, so I didn't come from a military family per se. All the men basically did a tour during whatever war was on at the time. So my father was in the Navy during Vietnam. He did, 3 years. Most of my uncles, actually all of my uncles, I think, were, either in the Army or the Marine Corps or the Navy. One of them was a couple of them were in the Air Force. And then, my grandfather had served during World War II. My great-grandfather had served during World War I. So there's kind of a history of, I think we have a family that it's important for us to do our part. But nobody has stayed quite as long as I did. It was more of I'm going to do my part, I'm going to do what's expected of me, and then, traditionally come home, build a family, build a career. So. Oriented towards look, can you do the job? Can you keep up? Can you do what you need to do? We always put it can you fly the jet and can you lead your guys? There were a lot of things that sucked, but there were a lot of things that ultimately were very empowering. Like, if you can do this, if you can hack it with these guys, then you can do anything. So class rings at the military academies are very special and important. You earn it at the beginning of your senior year. On one side, there's the seal of the Air Force Academy. on the other side of the seal of our class, 2001. And we, it's a special thing to earn and a special thing to get to wear. The medal that is melted down for each class's rings, they take a little bit of metal. So for instance, when graduates pass away, they'll donate their rings back to the academy. They melt all those down. So inside this class ring, there's a little bit of metal from every previous class. So we have ties to one another. It's a neat thing to get to wear and to earn, and to something that binds you to your classmates in a very special way. It's my flying jacket. So it's another kind of traditional neat thing about the Air Force, keeps us warm and flighty. So it's got our name tag. It's got this silk thing inside that has a message in case we're shot down. It says, I'm an American, I don't speak your language, I don't mean to harm you. Please help me with food and water. Please help me find my way back to the Americans, and you'll be rewarded. So these, in other conflicts, it was French, German, Italian, etc. For ours, it's, Pashtun, Dari, like I said. So anything is what you remember. So the first time you land in Afghanistan, the first time the bad guys shoot a missile at you, the first time, I flew a lot of medevacs, so we would pick up the injured soldiers in Iraq and Afghanistan and then bring them back to Germany. The first time I did that, I remember. And then we did it so many times over the years that it all blends together. But then the first time one of those guys dies in a flight and you feel responsible for that, you remember that, obviously. Or just how much fun it is to take out a really big frickin' jet with your friends and fly at 330 knots, 300 feet off the ocean, and do some crazy maneuvering. And you're getting paid to do this with your friends. Like, it's so sweet. So things like that would overcome, obviously, the tough times. I was part of the unit for a while that was responsible for airlift of nuclear weapons and materials. So we're not making new nuclear weapons at this point, and so they're like your car. They need routine maintenance. There's one particular location in the United States where that occurs. So if we need to either bring some back for routine maintenance, or if the President or NATO orders a strategic realignment of nuclear weapons in the United States or at any locations they may be around the world, it was my squadron that would transport them. So these are the types that would be on fighter or bomber aircraft if they were to be delivered against an enemy. But when they just need to move from place to place, we would take them. So we did a very large movement a number of years ago. It was the largest aerial movement of nuclear weapons in history. We had 30 nuclear weapons on board, and that made us, our crew on that plane, the fourth largest nuclear power in the world at the time. We have incredible opportunity here. We really do. You're really only limited by how hard you're willing to work. And it's not like that everywhere. And we can say what we want, we can think what we want, we can be what we want, we can do what we want. And we have a system that we don't always like the results, sure, but we get to participate in them, right? Like, show up and vote, We get to do that. And that is, to me, that's amazing that we all get to walk into a voting booth and check our box on our secret ballot, and nobody gets to harass us over it. Nobody gets to threaten to kill us over it. We're so safe here, and we're a good people.